So a lot of things that I wanted to say actually have already been said in some way or another, or actually have been demonstrated in a really cool way. But one of the things I want to do is to be sure to credit my sources. And while these aren't all peer-reviewed, they actually are peer-reviewed. So Laura Levine, who unfortunately is no longer here from entomology. Oh no, she's still there. Oh, she moved up. And Sam Swindell and Tom Tripp and Rachel Halverson, Dean Lethe, John Medina, who came from that other university, and Ken Sufka, who have all been books and actually people who have really influenced my teaching a tremendous amount. So what's the most important thing you can do when you teach? We've already discussed it. Come on, what's the answer? Oh no. Oh dear. Be interested in your subject. You have to be passionate about it. Well, anybody know what this is? What is it, Laura?
Oh, that's a dung beetle.
That's a dung beetle. I one time rode with Laura in the car, and she started talking about dung beetles. I'd never heard of a dung beetle, and I thought, ooh, gross. By the time she finished, I was like, those are the coolest things I've ever heard of. I want to learn about them. And so when you teach, you have to be able to convey that same sense that, golly, this is the most interesting thing ever. I just took my class to the anatomy lab, and I had to spend a lot of time going, it's so interesting. It's a little yucky. It's so interesting. You're going to like, I know you're going to be, some of you are going to be bothered by it, but it's so interesting. They agreed. Move around the room. Students are in class for hours, and if you just are in the same place, and everybody has done this, but you want to get close to them. Sometime invading their personal space wakes them up for a little while. You can also have the opportunity to see if they're on Facebook or if they're texting, so that moving around helps them wake up. It also changes the sound of your voice, because you're not going from the same place all the time. So the acoustics in the room will also change. Also vary the pitch. So if you talk too much in the same tone all the time, first of all, it's unhealthy vocally, but the other problem is it's boring. So you want to occasionally get high, and sometimes you get low. And don't forget, every now and then, to stop talking. Isn't that interesting? So, John Medina, who goes to that other university, this is a wonderful book. It's called Brain Rules. And one of the things he mentions is that you have 10 minutes. 10-minute segments and people phase out. So at the end of 10 minutes, you need to do something else. So it's a great time to tell a joke, it's a time to tell a story, or it's a time to do an activity. Because I can always tell if I go on, and about 15 minutes, you just can see the glaze coming in, no matter how fascinating and wonderful you are. So think about each idea having about 10 minutes, and then move on to somehow break it up. That was like what you said about just stopping, giving them time to let that consolidate. Repeat, to remember. Repeat, to remember. Remember to repeat. You never have everybody listening at any given moment. So if it's something that's important, be sure you say it again. And then pause. And then say it again one more time, maybe in a different way. But just know they're not going to listen to everything you say all the time, no matter how fabulous and interesting you are. So I usually teach upper level classes or honors classes. And I was asked to teach a 100 level class. And I came in with, you know, think, pair, share and activities and let's discuss this and let's have some bring it all together kinds of questions. And everything failed. I was like, they hadn't read the book. They had homework, but the homework was an online quiz, and they quickly discovered that they could take the quiz, do the self-correction, hand me all the correct answers, never touch the material, and still get credit for the assignment. I was like, okay, that didn't work. They didn't read the book. They thought 12 minutes to prepare for class was too much. They felt that a lot of what I was doing was unreasonable. And so I went to talk to Sam, and I said, oh my gosh, you know, I don't know what to do. And she said, well, you need to shape their behavior. And I was like, huh. So I thought about what that meant. And so the next year when I taught the class, well, what I did with that first class was I gave up. I took the material from the book. I dumped it on a PowerPoint slide. I essentially read the book to them. They thought I was fabulous. I thought I was awful, but they got through the class. Otherwise, they would have all failed. So the next year, I said, okay, let's have a daily assignment. I want them to come to class. Show up. If you haven't read it, it's quite wonderful, the A Game. Show up. So how do I get them to show up? Well, first of all, I have to be fascinating and entertaining, and they want to come to class, but I need to give them more than that. So they had an assignment. They had to outline a chapter, just the main points, and then I wanted them to listen to something. Now, they had to listen and respond. They could say, I hated it. I can't stand violins. I don't know why I have to listen to classical music. I don't care what they wrote, but it had to be theirs. They had to hand it in. So they were now coming to class, and they were preparing for class. They were terrible at the exams, so I taught the material, then I spent 2 days where I gave them the questions and played the music and gave them the questions that would be on the test. We went over them in class. 2 days later, we took the test. Half of them failed. Half of them failed. I had given them the questions, we had done the answers, and they took the test, and half of them failed. I said, yeah, we're not going to get very far. You've got to do a little more here. So then for each test after that, I gave them a very thorough outline of what to study, a not so thorough outline, less thorough outline, and for the final test, I gave them nothing. And they did best on the last test of anything else. So I was teaching the content, but I also felt like I was teaching them to be better students. So it's some of the same things that are covered in the A Game. Show up. And in the 100 level classes, you really have to motivate that externally to some extent. Sit in front, he calls them the cheap seats, or in the back. Come to class prepared. They're not used to having to do that. So we need to motivate them to do that and to ask questions. So then there's some other really interesting things to think about. And these are kind of several basic points about teaching really any kind of a class, but one has to do with something called the actor-observer bias. And that is that when we look at somebody else, we judge their behavior and see who they are. But when we think about ourselves, we know the complexity of our personalities and what we really are like. So you're driving down the freeway and somebody cuts in front of you and you say, exactly, you jerk, what a miserable human being that is, right? The next day, you're driving down the freeway, your kid distracts you in the back row, you cut in front of somebody, you're like, oh gosh, I'm really sorry. I'm not a jerk, I'm really a nice person, but I was just distracted. What's that have to do with teaching? What?
Students are lazy.
Students are lazy.
Students are lazy.
Obviously. They're lazy. They didn't do the homework. They don't care, right? Okay, have you looked at you? What am I doing that is creating that? And I had a perfect example in my class on Wednesday. I have in the syllabus, this is due on Wednesday, this is Friday. There was some confusion. I sent them an email, for Wednesday do this, for Friday do this. On Wednesday I said, hand up your homework. And they said, we thought it was due on Friday. I thought, well, you know, I could have been distracted. I may have written the wrong thing in the email. So I said, okay, everybody turned it in on Friday. But I went upstairs and looked, and I was right, they were wrong. We talked about it today, and how what they needed to hear to make that clear. So we've cleared it up. But I didn't leap to saying that it was their fault. I wanted to see if it had been my fault first. Participation. If you're going to grade for participation, what do you need to know?
How to get them to participate.
That's part of it. What else? Who they are. Yeah, gotta know their names. So I learned this great thing. In my big classes, I have them make a sign and they put their name on it, and I go around with my camera and I take pictures of 3 of them at a time. I take them home, I put them on my computer, and when I'm grading, I look, oh, you're you. Ooh, you know. So you really get to know their names. I tell them what I'm doing. I tell them why I'm doing it. They don't have to participate. And I tell them I get rid of their pictures at the end of the semester, which I do. Much as I love them, I don't want to keep them. So that's a very helpful thing to do. Be sure you reward the right behavior. So think about what you're rewarding and what you're not rewarding. So I teach a 400 level class. I wasn't sure I should tell this story, but Sam told me I should. So they were supposed to read the material, and this class was kind of iffy about preparing. And you know, at this level, you kind of expect them to up the game a little. So I'm standing in class, and I opened the book, and I said, okay, can anybody tell me what the diagram is on page whatever? And they kind of went, it's a circular diagram. Oh, you're supposed to have your mouth open when you sing. No? Anybody else? Not a single person in the class had read the book. They hadn't read the chapter. And I thought, okay, I had things prepared that we were going to do that were dependent on their having read the material. So, okay, fine, I'll just go through it. I'll dump it on the board and teach it to them. And I started to write the first thing on the board, and then I went, this makes me really angry. I put down the marker, I picked up my book, I packed my bag, and I said, I was prepared to work with you on this material, but you didn't do your part, so this is a waste of my time. And I walked out the room. I've only done it once. They were, the whole class looked like that. They were like, they read the material from then on. Now, I don't really recommend it, but it was one of those times where I really thought about, do I want to spoon feed them this material? And I just decided that at this level, they're juniors and seniors, I shouldn't spoon feed them the material. And it was very effective, and there was a carryover for a couple of years where students had heard that Dr. Converse, who's always laughing and always kind and doesn't get upset, got really mad. So laptops and cell phones, I actually have a policy, and we really talk about whether or not I want them in the classroom and how to use them. And I'm very comfortable looking at the students and saying, put your cell phone away, it's inappropriate. I tell them I think it's rude to the teacher. To me, I find it rude, and I think it's distracting to others in the class. On the other hand, sometimes they're useful to use in the classroom, and I think it's just good to have a really clear policy. Be sure you give value beyond the book. If they're going to come to class, don't just read the book to them. I mean, they can do that at home. So make sure there's something you're doing that makes it worth their money to come to the class. Of course, in my 100 level class that first year, I didn't give them any value. I just read them the book. There was a great moment in that class. The book was on the computer. They had it on our computer. And I was talking about Wagner and the leitmotif, and I said it's like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, where there are musical themes that connote certain things. And this girl picks up her computer and turns it to her friend. And I kind of looked at her, and she said, it's in the book. She was delighted that that information was in the book. And unfortunately, she didn't know that. PowerPoint. Less is more. The more pictures you use, the more visually engaging it is. And you know, using pictures is really fun, because you take a concept and you go to Google Images and you put in, you know, something like studious, and out come all these pictures, and then you can kind of pick the one. It's really, it's a great game. Start with an overview. Tell them what you're going to talk about, and then be sure you summarize. So what you don't want to do is teaching a concept as they're packing their bags. And wait, I have one more thing to tell you, and it's really important that you understand it. So really kind of plan that. So you start with an overview, end with a review. And then activities, many of these you know, think, pair, share works great in all kinds of classes. If you want them to get to know each other, sometimes if you have a question, you give them a piece of paper and say, okay, everybody up, go ask somebody else to answer this question. You're moving the material, you're getting them out of your seats, they get to know each other, it encourages conversation. Sometimes you can do the same kind of thing with what do you think is the most important idea. Give them an idea, again, let them talk to each other, bring it to the group. And then the last thing here is peer review of papers. I taught a UCOR class, and there were 50 students, and they each had to write 2 papers, which I had to read. I'm sorry, I had the opportunity to read. And it's amazing I'm not bald. They were horrible, horrible. So I read a book called Engaging Ideas, and he talked about introducing a peer review. So I took 2 lectures out of that class, and I put in peer review. When their paper was, a week before their paper was due, I had them meet in groups of 3. They read each other's papers. They had to fill out a form. And then a week later, they gave me the rough draft, the peer review form, and the paper itself. And the papers went from being, oh my God, awful, to be actually being a pleasure to read. It made a huge difference, and it was totally worth the time in the class. They also learned to rewrite their papers, which of course is a wonderful thing. And the other thing was that they read 2 other people's ideas. And that was a benefit I hadn't completely expected. So remember, be excited, be interested in what you're teaching. Move around and vary your voice. Try different techniques to engage discussion, break up lectures, questions, jokes. Shape the behavior you desire. That's very important. And go ahead and read books. Brain Rules is wonderful. If you don't know it, that's a great one. The A Game I recommend. Engaging Ideas is another really good book. So read, and thank you, and have a great day. Dean Lethe, John Medina, who came from that other university, and Ken Sufka, who have all been books and actually people who have really influenced my teaching a tremendous amount. So what's the most important thing you can do when you teach? We've already discussed it. Come on, what's the answer? Oh no. Oh dear. Be interested in your subject. You have to be passionate about it. Well, anybody know what this is? So interesting. It's a little yucky. It's so interesting. You're going to like, I know you're going to be, some of you are going to be bothered by it, but it's so interesting. They agreed. Move around the room. Students are in class for hours, and if you just are in the same place, and everybody has done this, but you want to get close to them. Sometime invading their personal space wakes them up for a little while. You can also have the opportunity to see if they're on Facebook or if they're texting, so that moving around helps them. So a lot of things that I wanted to say actually have already been said in some way or another, or actually have been demonstrated in a really cool way. But one of the things I want to do is to be sure to credit my sources. And while these aren't all peer reviewed, they actually are peer reviewed. So Laura Levine, who unfortunately is no longer here from entomology. Oh no, she's still there. Oh, she moved up. And Sam Swindell and Tom Tripp and Rachel Howell. Wake up. It also changes the sound of your voice because you're not going from the same place all the time. So the acoustics in the room will also change. Also vary the pitch. So if you talk too much in the same tone all the time, first of all, it's unhealthy vocally, but the other problem is it's boring. So you want to occasionally get high and sometimes you get low. And don't forget every now and then to stop talking. Isn't that interesting? What is it, Laura?
Oh, that's a dung beetle.
That's a dung beetle. I one time rode with Laura in the car and she started talking about dung beetles. I'd never heard of a dung beetle and I thought, ooh, gross. By the time she finished, I was like, those are the coolest things I've ever heard of. I want to learn about them. And so when you teach, you have to be able to convey that same sense that, golly, this is the most interesting thing ever. I just took my class to the anatomy lab and I had to spend a lot of time going, it's